Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. We're back to Russia, Ukraine, 3.5 years into the war, and no sense that it is winding down anytime soon. Rather, we're seeing escalations from the Russian side in terms of record levels of drones being sent in attacks into Ukraine, including targeting Ukraine's most important government buildings, a direct strike over the weekend, more civilians dead and injured. Also seeing attacks by Russia, almost certainly by Russia. The intelligence reflects that, with efforts to jam GPS on Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission's official plane. That is all showing off that Russian President Putin does not feel like he's under pressure, does not feel like he needs to engage directly with the Ukrainians or accept a ceasefire, despite what the Americans and Europeans are demanding. There is Ukrainian escalation as well. The Ukrainians increasingly capable of directly striking Russian refining capability and taking some of their oil off the market, which has led to some upward level of energy prices around the world, though still comparatively low, given that demand is not what it has been and growth is pretty soft. Plus, there's plenty of oil on the market from OPEC and other places. And the fact that the Ukrainians are increasingly developing expanded missile capabilities themselves, specifically the Flamingo missile, which they can launch and can hit inside Russia pretty deep, can also take Crimea targets. That's not something they need from the Europeans or the Americans. They're actually producing it. Their drone production is expanding exponentially. So what does all of this mean? Well, the front lines aren't changing all of that much. The Russians are incrementally taking more territory. They're threatening a couple of significant cities in the southeast, territory that the Russians have illegally annexed, but do not at this point occupy. There aren't all that many people on the front lines because the drones have made it extremely dangerous for anybody to move or operate there. So instead of seeing, large numbers of Russian infantry and, columns of tanks, you're seeing small groups of 4, 6, 8 men taking small amounts of territory, supported by drones and missile strikes and the rest. But over time, the ability of the Ukrainians to continue to muster the fighting force that they have is deteriorating. And the Russians believe, I think correctly, that the longer they engage in this war, the less capable the Ukrainians will be in actually physically providing their defenses. And that means that Russia's going to be in a better position to demand outcomes in terms that they want. There's also a greater possibility that something outside the box happens, like Zelensky is assassinated, or like significant Russian leaders are taken out, or oligarchs, or their kids. The abilities of both of these countries to improve their offensive capabilities, they're putting everything into it, economically, diplomatically. This is, hard to keep that kind of a war constrained and in the box. So the real question is whether or not whether the Russians will continue, but whether anything is going to change from the West that would make Putin feel like his calculus is altering. I don't believe the Ukrainians can do that by themselves. It is conceivable that as the Europeans stand up and provide more, that if the United States stands strongly with them, that could alter Putin's calculation. No sense that it will, but could. Thus far, what we've seen from Trump is his efforts at a carrot with Putin have failed. He's talked about sticks, but those have been arbitrary. The deadlines have come and passed without consequence on many occasions now. making Trump look not very credible, at least on the Russia file. So if you're Putin, you don't believe that there are going to be significant consequences. He showed up in Anchorage and they had a good meeting as far as that goes. But that doesn't mean that Trump's going to do anything either to further empower the Ukrainians or to further constrain the Russians. And at this point, it's not very believable that's really going to change. So I think that if you are Putin and you are feeling emboldened by lots more public support from the Chinese, emboldened by an ineffective US strategy, and feeling like even with European support of Ukraine, ultimately you're putting yourself in a better situation and your economy can stand up longer than the Ukrainian military, you're going to keep going. And I think that is, unfortunately, the safe bet right now. So 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months going forward, the war keeps going. The Russians are still being maximally sanctioned by the Europeans, but others around the world are prepared to do business with them. The US isn't doing as much as it has, and Putin sees very little reason to back away. Not a great story. And the danger here, of course, is what happens if the Russians feel like they can and should start striking against European allies with greater impunity. I mentioned the von der Leyen airplane. I haven't seen any direct response from the United States government or the US president, for that matter, saying this is unacceptable and there'll be consequences of those kinds of hybrid strikes against NATO countries and NATO leaders. And the more the Russians do that, the greater the likelihood that this escalates in an unanticipated and uncontrollable way. So, I mean, just as Chancellor Merz from Germany has said that, fighting going on in Ukraine, but Putin's not going to stop there. Certainly in terms of asymmetric warfare, Putin has not stopped there. The willingness of the Russians to directly put resources into espionage and criminal activities and vandalism and other disruption into NATO countries themselves has been undeterred and is increasing. That's not NATO suddenly seeing Russian tanks pile across the border, but it is increasingly not just a proxy war, but a direct hybrid war. And that's something I think we should all be growing in our concerns about because the level of deterrence against Putin from not just Ukraine, but from NATO has proven to be increasingly limited. Okay, that's it for me, and I'll talk to y'all real soon.